A little bit more about American leadership and what's happening overseas. Benjamin Collins, U.S. Army Special Forces veteran and a Green Beret who served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, joins us now on set. We're going to talk a little bit about Afghanistan because that's another big story that's happening today. But in the more immediate, you heard what Senator John McCain said about American leadership in the Middle East. What's your reaction to what he had to say?
Well, he's absolutely right. Look, I mean, we've pretty much abrogated any sort of leadership position in the Middle East, and leadership hates a vacuum. So somebody stepped in, and it happened to be Putin. And I think the reality is, that when you've got a triad of countries like Syria with Assad and the Ayatollahs in Iran and Russia that are coming together, and Putin's even reached out to Saudi Arabia to create some ties there. I mean, it's extremely alarming. I mean, any influence that we had, 5-6 years ago is certainly just completely evaporated.
As a veteran, as someone who's served the country, how does that feel?
Well, to me, it's just it's myopic, right? I mean, to me, it's you have to have a long view of this, right? I mean, effectively, I think Putin is playing chess in that region, and President Obama is playing checkers. So we've essentially we're looking at, we've forgotten consequences are going to come to fruition, and he's not, and he just doesn't care.
Right now, there are men and women that are flying missions over Syria. Senator John McCain ended his speech there on the Senate floor saying the message should be to Russia, we're going to go wherever we want, whenever we want, and that's the way it's going to be. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, somebody needs to deconflict over there, right? I mean, when you're running an air operations center, I mean, it's hard work.
Do we want to deconflict, though? I mean, we keep on hearing that term deconflict, and I'm just curious exactly what we mean by it, because we want the conflict to end eventually. Sometimes you actually have to heighten the aggression to end it. So what is the obsession with deconflict?
Well, I think when you hear the term deconflict from a military perspective, it means, look, right now you've got Turkish planes, you've got American planes, you've got Russian planes. You need to have somebody who's actually standing there and managing this airspace, right? Otherwise, we're going to have planes crashing into each other.
That's scary.
It is scary. You've got, if we have our planes, as we've discussed, acting in a close air support mission for the troops that we've been training, the Free Syrian Army, and then you've got Russian troops or Russian surface-to-air missiles locking onto our planes. We're dropping bombs. Maybe we're hitting a Russian convoy. I mean, the consequences of this thing is absolutely
and just
insane.
A little miscalculation can become something much bigger.
Yes.
So what do you think? I mean, what do you think is the way forward here? We're only a few hours into the Russian bombing campaign. We are continuing our campaign right now. What is our calculation moving forward? What do you think our goal needs to be here?
Well, look, I think that there's the reality here, just like what's occurring in Afghanistan, is here there's a political calculation and then a military, and a tactical calculation. And on our best day, those two things would be tied together. They're not anymore, right? So I think Obama's political calculation is we do not want to get mired in that region. We're going to do just enough to make it, seem to the world as if we're doing something. I mean, you listen to those speeches in the UN last week. I mean, it was almost comedy if it wasn't true.
Let's talk a little bit about Afghanistan, because there is a crossover, and Senator McCain mentioned what was happening in Afghanistan. You have this major city in the north. It's a gateway, as it was described in the Washington Post, to Central Asia. It's a crucial strategic city. And you have the Taliban that have overtaken this area. You've spent a great deal of your life in Afghanistan, 3 tours there. And the question that keeps coming up just over the last 48 hours because of what happened in the city is whether or not we need to leave American troops in Afghanistan in a role that will help maintain security in that country. That's the same conversation we're having about Iraq. That's the same conversation in many ways we're having about Syria. What do you think about that? So
look, the last I'd say 5-6 years in Afghanistan have been just an absolute complete strategic failure on our part. So the way I feel about it, I have to split it, right? On the one hand, I'm emotionally biased, like other soldiers that lost friends and spent so much time over there. However, at the height of our surge in Afghanistan, we had about 120,000 soldiers when we started to make a dent, because there's Kabul and then there's the outerlying provinces, right? So, and you can't be everywhere all the time. You can't be everywhere all the time with 120,000 soldiers, much less 10,000 soldiers, right? So right now, in my opinion, look, anybody that's really spent some time there and is going to tell the truth about it, we're wasting time, we're wasting money, and we're wasting soldiers because we're half-stepping. If we're going to do it, let's do it. Let's not put our guys' lives in jeopardy. So right now we're playing whack-a-mole with the Taliban, efforts. We're moving in Kunduz, but most of the people are down in the south. So to me, this is not going to end well.
We're hearing that special forces actually did take place in combat at the airport in the city because they were fired upon by the Taliban. But the rules of engagement are that these 10,000 troops in Afghanistan are not supposed to participate in combat unless they are fired upon, which they were in this case. What sort of risk are we putting our soldiers in who are still there at this time?
Tremendous amount of risk, right? And so how much close air, right? So if our guys are going to come under fire, you can bet that the close air support, the limited resources that are there will come. But what about the rest of the medical, right? If guys get hurt, do we have the appropriate medevac capabilities to get them to a hospital? Is there enough of a hospital stood up? It's just, you can't just do this in a small piece. There's a much bigger footprint.
My husband, who also is a veteran, as you know, has mentioned that proximity doesn't equal security. And that's how he looks at troop presence. And that seems that as someone else who has been in combat that you feel the same. But then the question is, well, what happens to Afghanistan or what happens to Iraq? And are we okay if both of those countries dissolve into violence?
No, not really. So remember, the whole point that we went in there was to because after 9/11 it had been a safe haven for terrorists. So let's actually look at where Kunduz is, right? I mean, Kunduz is very strategically important as well. So it borders Tajikistan, right? So now we're going to go back to somebody else we've been talking about this morning. Who else has been pushing his troops into Tajikistan? Vladimir Putin.
Interesting.
So he's been pushing his troops on that border. You've got Pakistan that's right next to Kunduz province as well. They've already got 2.5 million refugees. They'll have another 2 million. I mean, we could very, very quickly, and this isn't just doomsday. I mean, this could happen very soon. Go find ourselves back into the civil war of the 90s. So if Afghanistan collapses, because look, the reality is 95-ish percent of GDP for Afghanistan is from military and foreign aid. They can't sustain themselves economically. They can't sustain themselves militarily. We are their GDP. So how long are we really going to be willing to stand there and prop them up as a military or an economy? So, and honestly, to me, I think, this will spiral back into a civil war, at least in the outer provinces. I think we might be able to solidify something in Kabul, but we're gonna go back to a lot of what we saw in the 90s, and it's just we're gonna go back to seeing a safe haven, and we're gonna pay the price for it.
It's a scary thought, but we have to deal in reality in order to actually figure out what the goals are. Ben, great to have you as always. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
John?
He's accused of murdering 2 Virginia college students.